forward to it very much.
You mentioned your name to say, would you like to do the session? I said, of course, he's an old friend. I'm going to do that.
Yes, Harsh and I have had this critical conversation sitting in his drawing room, living room, remember?
Yes, of course. With great fondness. Wonderful. Rekha?
Yeah. So with your permission, I'm going to start now. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Arun Maira, Mr. Harsh Pati Singhania. Welcome to the 42nd edition of AIMA's very popular Leaders Speak program. It's a great pleasure to have you all with us and to meet and talk to a very special person, Mr. Arun Maira. Some of you might have just heard him say that we've known each other for over 20 years. I think it's closer to 25.
Yes.
And it's a real pleasure to have you back, Mr. Maira, on the AIMA platform. And as I just said, that now that we have you back again, we are going to ensure that we keep you with us and you keep coming back to us and speaking to our members. We are really looking forward to listening to you, Mr. Maira. You're one of India's foremost thinkers. And we look forward to hearing you talk about your latest book, A Billion Fireflies, Critical Conversations to Shape a New Post-Pandemic World. Mr. Maira, many thanks for agreeing to join us today and to speak to our members and also discuss your new book. We are looking forward to you sharing your vast wisdom on remaking the world that has gone awry because of the COVID. You have a most distinguished CV for a professional manager. You are a Tata Group veteran. You have headed one of the world's most influential consulting firm, the BCG, and you have been a policy advisor to the Government of India with the rank of a minister. You have taken to philanthropy management in a big way, and you are the chairman of the Board of Trustees of HelpAge International and chairman of the Foundation of MSME Clusters. You have been involved with many national and international developmental and charity organizations, including the UN Global Compact and Save the Children India. A keen leadership and policy thinker and a diligent observer of the economic and social trends, you have written many books about transformational change. Your body of work includes the books Redesigning the Airplane While Flying, Reforming Institutions, Transforming Capitalism, Improving the World for Everyone, and Shaping the Future, Aspirational Leadership in India and Beyond. You also write on policy and institutional issues for India's top newspapers and speak at international forums. Once again, a very warm welcome to you. Ladies and gentlemen, COVID has intensified change in every area of human affairs, and there's a lot of anxiety everywhere because of the loss of the firm ground of the familiar and the uncertainty of the future. People are a lot less sure about security of life and income during the second wave of COVID, and there is a tremendous pressure on institutions to deliver instant relief and hope. There has never been a more urgent need for new, improved ideas for leadership and governance. We are pleased to have Mr. Maira with us today, and we would like him to tell us more about where we go from here. But before I hand over the floor to Mr. Harsh Pati Singhania to conduct the session, we have a short video for you. I'm requesting my IT team to come up with the video. Mr. Maira, before I hand you over to Mr. Singhania, I'd just like to tell you that we have close to 300 people on Zoom right now, and we are also live streaming this session on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So over to you, Mr. Singhania.
Thank you, Rekha, and good evening, everyone. Am I audible enough? Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. And I'm delighted to be here at this particular session, and the pleasure is even more greater since I'm welcoming a very dear friend, Mr. Arun Maira, He has been a wonderful friend for a long time. And he's been one of the very senior and foremost thinkers in our country. And as you said, Rekha, he's donned many caps. I first met him when he was with BCG. And then our relationship continued, and he moved on to when he went into the then Planning Commission and a whole lot of other areas. We used to interact on policy matters. And beyond that, he's been a personal friend. And I'm delighted to have you with us, Arunji, today. And also the opportunity for all of us at AIMA to hear you on your thoughts on a very critical issue as to how this turbulent world can perhaps, and I use the word perhaps, be fixed. I see on the call we have several people, including some past presidents of AIMA. So we have a distinguished audience here with for you today. And you have been writing extensively during the crisis and making observations on the management of health and economic situations. In your latest book, as Rekha was mentioning, and we just saw, A Billion Fireflies, critical conversations to shape a new post-pandemic world. It's a heartfelt plea for common sense in dealing with the challenges and changes during COVID. You have argued against using a top-down approach only and a strong-arm method to contain the pandemic, and have appealed for solving the world's problems more on a bottom-up basis. You have also warned that if this crisis is not used to configure a better world, or I should say reconfigure a better world, it will return to the bad old divisions and inequalities with a vengeance. India is facing an unprecedented crisis, ladies and gentlemen. The COVID virus has shown us the fragility of India's health systems, its economy, as well as our governance systems. Health systems in cities are unable to cope with the pressure, and even more so in the rural areas, where there is an overall shortfall of over 76% specialists as compared to the requirement for existing community health centers. People are struggling with joblessness and reduced income. Businesses are under pressure as consumers are tightening their purse strings and saving for health emergencies now. And the economy is stressed. The outlook is fraught with uncertainty. The question is then, how do we get out of this crisis? We need new solutions to not only the crisis we are in, but also to the pre-pandemic economic management, which has partly brought about this situation. The crisis is revealed everywhere, not only in India, but also in countries like the United States, the need for more government, not less, to build public health systems and to strengthen social security for all citizens. It has also revealed the vital role that the private sector and innovation play in this whole area. For example, in the development story of new vaccines to fight the virus, the vaccine success story has also revealed the tensions between private profits and public interests. In your recent writings, you have argued against indiscriminate privatization of public responsibility. Technology is changing the structures, processes, and aspirations of societies. And as you have suggested in your writings, there is a need to use technology to integrate society instead of breaking it up. A large number of people are withdrawing from social and political participation. And that is not a victory for organized opinion, but a concern for the health of the civilization itself. Your new book argues against resignation and offers optimism for a better future through informed and civil dialogue. You have also put forth interesting thoughts on the ways to turn the economy around and make it more just and equitable. You have been suggesting more effective ways of creating jobs in large numbers in a rapidly digitizing economy. Arunji, your book is very timely. However, I would also draw attention to your earlier book, where you talked about, which is Transforming Systems, why the world needs a new ethical toolkit, where you warned that unless leaders and managers make fundamental changes in their ideas and methods, growth will not be sustainable and equitable. You presented a new ethical toolkit for leaders and managers, which is very, very relevant to AIMA's members, as that is what they consist of. It is now my pleasure to invite you to present your essential ideas on setting right, as you have put it, this topsy-turvy world in order. So thank you very much and welcome once again to AIMA.
Thank you so much, Harsh. Am I loud enough?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for laying out, describing the canvas so clearly and so broadly and so well, and also for putting some of my thoughts onto that canvas and recalling those thoughts. I had the pleasure and the honor, Rekha will remember, of being on with C.K. Prahlad, Professor C.K. Prahlad, the late Professor C.K. Prahlad, who had written this seminal book about the profit at the bottom of the pyramid, to organize for AIMA a conference on CSR. And I insisted that the theme of the conference must be the death of CSR and the birth of business responsibility. And I remember Rekha and others being shocked to say, well, we are trying to propagate CSR, and you are saying just the opposite, that forget CSR, you've got to be more responsible, totally responsible for others around yourself and the world. So it's the same theme, and that was 12 years ago, perhaps. And we haven't changed our ideas much. And that is the point of my book, okay? But how do we change our ideas is the real point of the book, and I'll talk about both things. The COVID crisis is not just a medical or not even just a health crisis. It is a crisis of governance. It's a crisis of organizing ourselves together to make life good for everyone, which we haven't been doing. To get out of the COVID crisis as fast as possible is the first requirement of our leaders, but also we require of our leaders to build the system, as you said, reform it and build it, so that we don't have such a crisis again. We need leaders who know what the solution is to this twin crisis, and leaders who have the ability to align diverse people to work together for a common purpose. Those are the key leadership abilities that are required to understand complex problems and to figure out what is the path through them that will create a more sustainable world. And the second is, as I said, the ability to inspire people to work together to create this world together. India and the world need systems leaders who can transform systems in an ethical way. And for this, we need to turn to three teachers. They need to turn to three teachers. We all need to turn to three teachers. One is Albert Einstein. The second is the COVID virus itself. And the third is Vietnam. Let me start with Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein said that it is madness to try to solve a problem with the same method that has created the problem. Einstein introduced a new paradigm into physics, his general theory of relativity. Before that, all physicists inspired by Newton, thought of nature as a machine with objects and parts in it which were attracted to each other by gravity. A view of nature, like I said, a machine with moving parts connected with each other in it. But Einstein changed that with relativity. And then from that came the physics of uncertainty, the physics which said that matter is really waves, it doesn't exist in concrete form. And physics then came into the realm of, if I could say, the reality. And I'm going to read for our listeners here today, and thank them for being here with me. And you mentioned that there's some very senior people with us today with experience. So I'm speaking to young and old people here together. I'm reading for you the prologue that Albert Einstein wrote for a book that Max Planck, who's one of the seminal leaders in physics and got the Nobel Prize in the early part of the last century, a book that Max Planck wrote in 1932 with the title, Where is Science Going? And in the prologue, Einstein says about Planck and the change he brought about into the physicist's view of the world. Einstein says, although this was not apparent at the time, it marked the end of the mechanical age in science and the opening of a new era. Sorry, that actually is not Einstein's quote. That is the quote from the introduction by James Murray, but that's important, what I just said. What Einstein had said in the prologue before that was the fact that in science, we have to be content with an incomplete picture of the physical nature is not due to the nature of the universe itself, but rather to us. It is how we think of ourselves and our relationship to nature that this has to change. That's what Einstein wrote in the prologue. And as James Murray, who wrote the introduction to that book in 1932, said, which I just read out, that it's not possible to explain the world in a mechanical way. We cannot understand the world by continuing with any mechanical line of thought. And I want to come then to a recent book compiled by the Institute of Public Policy Research in the UK in 2012, the title of which is Complex New World, Translating New Economic Thinking into Public Policy. And here's what the authors say, that at heart from this perspective, the perspective of the economic theories that we've been following for the last 100 years, at heart from this perspective, the world is seen as a machine. Admittedly, a complicated one, but one that can be controlled with the right pressure on this button, just the right amount of pull on that lever. It is a world in which everything can be quantified and targets can not only be set, they can be achieved thanks to the cleverness of experts. But the world is simply not like this. It is much more complex, a much less controllable place than rational economists believe. It's not a world that can be controlled by adjusting the lever of inflation rate or just setting a carbon price and making the environment sustainable. This view of the world that economists and policymakers have adopted, the mechanical view, must change just as it has changed in physics 70 or 100 years ago. So that's the setting, and that's what Einstein is reminding us of, we as leaders and policymakers. I want to now move to the other lessons, which are from the COVID pandemic itself, the COVID virus, and then to Vietnam. But before that, just to remind ourselves about the debates and the conversations we need to have. I watch, as you must do, many of you, the debates between economists. They're all debates within the box of the present description of the world through an economics lens. They can take a left view within it or the right view within it, more government or less government, but all within the same view of the world as a machine. Whereas we need to have a discussion out of the box to create a new policy framework, a new economic framework for the 21st century. So let me come to know what we can learn about the world of action from the COVID virus as well as from Vietnam. What I've talked just now is about what we need to learn from the world of thought, from scientists. So what can we learn from the virus? The virus has had enormous impact on scale. Can anyone doubt this? The evidence is all around us. Which large factory has produced this virus? And who's the controller telling the virus where to go and what to do? And yet, it has had a huge impact. So we must adjust our theories of action that to have a large scale impact, you need to have a large factory producing a lot of standard things and then a large controller to distribute those things all around the world. We're trying to do that with vaccines, by the way. What did Vietnam teach the United States? The United States had more resources, more scientists, more control centers with Robert McNamara and all his experts directing the war. And Vietnam, a much poorer country, there were just people with spirit, small arms, and guerrillas, and they were able to defeat a much more powerful, well-resourced army. It's something like the war that we're having with the virus. So hold that. But let's go further to Vietnam. Vietnam has shown the world how to fight this virus without destroying lives, of course, and livelihoods at the same time. Vietnam, for 30 years, has been creating deliberately with government policy and more actively in the last 10 or 15 years, when I've been associated with some of the work as chairman of HelpAge International, by law, creating women's associations everywhere, and by law, creating old people's associations as nuclei for communities to gather and to find solutions together to improve the lives of women, of older people, of everyone in the community. So that's the Vietnam way. Now, as we've been looking, as our experts have been looking at the performance of countries with respect to the tackling the pandemic, they look at two axes. One of them is how many people were infected and died by the virus. Let's say it's the horizontal axis. On the vertical axis, how badly was the economy affected? How many percentage points were lost and how many livelihoods were lost? The country that comes right on top, the best performer on both, is Vietnam. The least effect, the least number of deaths and the least effect on its economy. Other countries up there on that square on the top are Denmark, Finland, Taiwan, New Zealand. And by the way, on our subcontinent, Bangladesh, our neighbor, which was much poorer than us, has performed much better than India on both these axes than we have. And within India, we have states like Kerala, which have again done better than most other states or all states. And these are all examples of states or countries which have built up bottom up, people's organizations and people taking responsibilities for their own surroundings, their own villages, and their own communities. And they have done the best on both, manage the pandemic better, as well as ensure the least harm to people's lives and livelihoods where they are. The Sustainable Development Goals, which is the big thing that we've all been concerned about and should remain concerned about, but have sort of had to put in the background when COVID came. The SDGs are also describing global problems, just like the COVID pandemic is. And there are 17 of these goals that describe in quite great detail what we need to do, or the goals we need to achieve for the environment, for society, for the economy, to make it good for everyone and for the whole world. So these are very complex problems of the environment combined with the economy, combined with the society. And they take different shapes, these problems in Kerala, in Vietnam, in New York City, in Delhi. We cannot have a one-size-fits-all solution to achieve the SDGs. Solutions will have to be found locally by communities, thinking of the system as a whole and working together to make the total well-being of their communities to improve. So this is where I say topsy-turvy. We must turn around and say, system solutions found locally and implemented by communities collaboratively is the way to solve the global systemic problems that are described in the SDGs and that we've also now confronted with the COVID. And this is therefore also coming to the title of my book, The Billion Fireflies. We need a billion places of energy and action on the ground, people with their own light, cooperating with others around them and creating more light for everybody. And thus, with a billion fireflies arising, India is a country of 1.3 billion. I'm saying a billion fireflies arising within India, we can turn this country to light. That's how India will shine. That's how India will really shine. So what we need is new forms of leaders, a new theory of action and new forms of leaders. We need systems leaders who are not systems controllers. And systems leaders need three disciplines. The discipline of systems acting, which is nurturing collaboration among stakeholders and not being controllers. The discipline of systems thinking. And let me elaborate this a little bit since I've talked about science earlier. The European Enlightenment of the 17th and the 18th century brought science to the world, and science, as it has developed, has broken itself into many, many parts, different specialities, and those specialities are broken into narrower parts. And so we have scientists who know more and more about less and less. And unless we combine the knowledge of all the scientists, we can, by implementing the view of one scientist in his discipline or her discipline, harm the rest of the system. And we have seen this in the case of the pandemic. Two scientific approaches have been used to solve the COVID problem. One of them is in the vaccines, which says, when you develop something which is a very strong solution, please first test it. Test it in a variety of demographics. Make sure that you are understanding the side effects before you allow it to be used. But in the lockdown, which is also recommended by public health experts, knowing no other way, perhaps, said, just do it. And in India, we did it the hardest, and the side effects of that solution have destroyed people's lives much more than even the COVID has done in our country. So systems thinking says, please don't turn to the domain expert of the problem. Look at all the other domains around this problem to make sure that your solution is not harming other parts of the solution. So learning to work together, to listen to each other, to think together, scientists must learn this, as well as policy makers and leaders must learn it too. Systems thinking. The third is systems being. And that I come back to Einstein, where he was saying, just be humble. You cannot understand the complexity around yourself, and it's all right. You are small, and the world is beautiful and big. Your role in the world is to ensure that you don't harm the world that gave you birth, and that will continue to nurture you and others around you. So please take care of it. Don't, like a very smart engineer, try to re-engineer the world and destroy nature, which is what we've been doing with technology and science all these years. So become humble about it. And ethical reasoning is what? Every religion says, don't be selfish, care for others. We have created by design an institution, the capitalist limited liability company, which is required by law to be selfish, to take care only of its investors and its interests. And that is why I'm reminding us that we had this seminal meeting with Sika Prahlad, with AIMA. Please don't think of CSR as after I made the profit, I might give a little bit away for some good causes. Your whole business must be one which nurtures the well-being of everything around you. And Gandhi ji had said, he was not against people making wealth. He said, you must, because you will be using resources efficiently, and we need efficiency in the use of resources. But the wealth that is produced from that efficiency doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the world, it belongs to the community. So that's the lesson of systems being. So these are the three disciplines that managers must learn, business schools must begin to teach, or they can't teach these things sometimes, but to create conditions for students to ask themselves these questions. Am I doing the right thing? Not, am I doing the smart thing that will produce a more efficient output and more wealth for the investors? Am I doing the right thing? And to judge whether it's the right thing, you have to judge what impact it's having on the lives of others, and especially of those who have the least. And Gandhiji's principle of Anantodaya is what I'll end with, where he said to a policymaker, when you are thinking of an action to take or a policy to make, think of the effect it will have on the poorest person that can come to your mind. That is the test. So thank you so much for hearing me. We would need to have conversations because our ideas get challenged when others ask us, why do you think that is right? We must learn to listen to people not like us and not be caught in our cocoons, our bubbles, which social media unfortunately is forcing us to be in by guiding us to people that we like, by making us listen to people who like us. And so we are creating bubbles of people who just like each other and hate people outside those bubbles. And we are destroying the world by not combining the caring of all people. All human beings do care, but they may have different ideas. Let's listen to each other's caring. Let's say we have to find a new solution which will achieve for all of us what we most deeply care about. And we need new ideas, new methods, new policies, new economies. So thank you, Harsh. And thank you, Rekha.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maira, for all those very interesting and some, if I may say, out-of-the-box thoughts. Some things that that people don't ask, think about, usually. Now, we have a few past presidents also on this program. And although I can't see everybody at the same time, but I'm just wondering if I'll ask a couple of them if they wish to raise a point, otherwise we'll move to the audience. We have Mr. Mukundan here. Mr. Mukundan, would you like to make any observation or ask a point? And then we have some others, Mr. Rajiv Kaur, Mr. Nitin Noria, etc. here, and Krishan Kalra. If any of you would like to have any thoughts or observations, then we'll turn it to various people. Yourself and then identify yourself and move on.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm absolutely delighted to be part of this. I had only one question. I fully agree with you. You've created a capitalist society where we are saying that you share what you make, and then you're saying you should be part of it. Are there any organizations which come to you as exemplars in that model which you stated, how we should move forward beyond the current archetypes and architecture we've created?
Well, thank you very much, Mukundan. It's always a joy to be with you, Mukundan. We have worked together on trying to get new thinking in business leaders, particularly. So let me go. We talk about, in the case of the environment, and a lot of us are concerned about the state of the environment and climate change, that we need to understand the flows in a circular, the circular economy. And we talk about the material and energy flows in that circular economy. That, things shouldn't choke up anywhere. They should keep flowing through it. And that makes a healthy, natural system, a healthy, natural economy. We know that, some good things like plastic, let me use the example, is a very good technical invention. It enables you to transport things safely, hygienically. It's very convenient. But if the plastic stops circulating and it starts accumulating in rivers and in oceans, it just chokes up the environment and begins to choke up the economy also. Okay, so I'm going to apply the same concept of circularity to the wealth economy. So what's the design of the economy? We've got people in small enterprises or people who buy their work, they produce something efficiently and they sell it, or it's taken from them to be sold. And there's some surplus created between the cost of what they did and the margin and the price that was obtained for it. Now, in the capitalist company system, that surplus is taken to the owners who invested in the enterprise. It becomes their wealth. And of course, it's up to them to use that wealth to invest further in more productive enterprises or whatever they wish to do. It's their wealth, it's their property right. Okay. Now, what's been happening in the last 30 years, 20 years, actually, most particularly in the last 20 years since the start of the millennium, is that the wealth being made by people through investments, they have been investing in other forms of creating just wealth through wealth. So the financial system has grown 3 times as fast as the real economy has grown. In fact, as people say, generally in the last few years, in many places, the real economy has remained flat, whereas the financial economy has grown. So people are making money out of money. They're not making money by putting their money into real investments, which creates jobs and work. So we need to create more enterprises which engage people to produce work, which your enterprise, Tata Chemicals and manufacturing enterprises do. They're not in the financial sector, but there too. When the wealth, the surplus is the wealth, I'm saying, is produced by the workers who do the work, that wealth is not accumulated by them to invest in what they choose to invest in, yeah, or to create, further enterprises for themselves, like small enterprises could well do. So what we are finding is in the circular wealth economy, the wealth is getting choked in one part of the system, and now we are saying we need that wealth to come down, trickle down, to water the real people's lives and the real economy. What are the 3 mechanisms by which that trickle down happens? One is taxes, but the wealthy people say, please don't tax us, otherwise we'll have no incentive to invest further. Invest in what? Of course, no one asks. Invest further, and they won't invest. And so there's no trickle down to the government of the money and through the government to the people for looking after public health, public education, and so on. The second mechanism of giving to the back to the people is CSR. We talked about it, and you can give 2% of your profit, which may be 10% of your revenue. So you can give some 0.2% of your entire revenues back to help improving the condition of the world and the environment. But how did you make the 100%? And if in making the 100%, you damage the environment and damage the lives of people by producing products which harm them, and then you set up hospitals with your 0.2% to take care of their health problems, I mean, it's a wrong paradigm, which is why that seminar that we had of CII was, we want to kill this idea of CSR and talk about genuine business responsibility. The third trickle down is the philanthropy stream. Many good people who have made a lot of wealth have started putting that wealth back. But again, when they give the wealth back, how much of that wealth really goes back from originally created? Yeah, you can talk of a person giving $1 billion or something, but we're talking of several trillions of dollars that are being produced in the capitalist world. And when they give the wealth back, this is another critical point, the philanthropists, the ideas they have of how things should be done and what things should be done are their ideas. It's not the people's ideas what's good for them. The people understand far better what is required. They know how to use the resources around them frugally to improve the well-being of everybody, and they care more for each other because they live with each other. So you've got to get the ideas of what is required to improve the world, not from the philanthropists and their experts, but from the people. And then, as a philanthropist, please just give this money to people to build their capacities to be able to improve their systems much more. So give money to help people build their capacities, not to implement schemes that you have thought about. And the same is true for government. All our government schemes, the experts have designed that this is what must be done. I'm designing the school for you, and you will implement that design of school. These are the teachers' salaries that you're allowed to pay. You will pay those, etc. So like I said, it's a mechanical design. And you as a controller think that you're improving something very complex and it can't be done.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, sir.
Right. Thank you very much. Mr. Kaul, Mr. Rajiv Kaul, do you have any observations or thoughts around this? I think you are there. Is he there, or let me just take a look? I thought he was there, but anyway, he's not there. We'll move on. There are some questions also from the audience. Mr. Maira, one of the things that people have raised in different ways, and this is particular one is from Mr. Ravindra Bhattacharya, is about the problem of individual and corporate versus corporate greed that you talked about is taking over the social need. Now, this is a point that you've been recurringly talking about. So, how do we need to think about this equity, equality, and ethics thing? And you've spoken about it today as well, but would you like to elaborate a bit more on that piece?
Yeah, thank you. Harsh, as I said, that all of us, I think instinctively, we are born to care for our siblings, we're born to care for our parents, we care for our children. This is natural. We care for others. Okay. Now, when we are made to serve a company, which is also, it's an entity, a limited liability company is declared as a citizen in law, as you know. It has all the rights of human citizens. It can sue, it can own property, right? It has the right of free speech. But this artificial creation that we have created, this institution, is required to be selfish. Now, I, as a human being, I joined to serve this company. Yeah, I've been asked to serve someone selfish and to make that selfish person's wealth even more. And therefore, I do find, saying so, I've lived my life within the corporate world, I've been a consultant to the corporate world, I've spent 45 years in that part, that this is the dilemma, that we have to begin to redesign the structures of the corporation. And to complete my answer to Mukundan, that cooperative enterprises where the people who do the work are also the shareholders of the enterprise. That is a real social enterprise. They're not socialist in the sense that someone is from the top, like a public sector, asking them to do work. They are, like Gandhiji said, they are real capitalists. They are generating capital and they are using the capital to improve the lives of themselves and their community. So we want India to be a country not just of 1 billion and 0.3 Democrats, but 1 billion capitalists also. And that can only happen if we redesign the forms of business institutions. We need far more institutions in which the decisions regarding what is the fair salary to be paid, what is then to be done with the surpluses generated, the people who do the work must participate in that much more, which is the idea of democracy anyway. In democracy, we say that even if a person has zero wealth, but has a beating heart, the person has an equal vote in how the enterprise as the country should be run. Mr. Mukesh Ambani has an equal vote as the beggar on the street if he goes to vote. Okay, but in a capitalist enterprise, those who own more, it's their right to have a greater say. So there's a problem of governance which the world is confronting, that the idea of democracy, which we so believe in, and the idea of capitalism, or let me say free market and business that we also believe in, they're clashing at the fundamental level about how decisions are taken and who has the right to say how the enterprise should be run.
Thank you. Mr. Krishnan Kalra, you are there. Did you have any questions or any observation?
Thank you, Mr. President. As I mentioned there, I don't have a question. Unfortunately, I haven't read the book as yet. So whatever comment I'll be making will be based on your introduction and what Mr. Maira has said. And also my observation is concerned solely about fighting the COVID and not on the economic side at all. Mr. Maira made a very interesting mention about Vietnam. Now, we are all aware that Vietnam fought a war for a long number of years with a much bigger adversary, USA, and finally made USA to withdraw and not they did not accept defeat and all that. I wonder whether, is there a parallel there? Is he alluding to the fact that we have to fight this enemy in the guerrilla manner, the way Vietnam fought the Americans and all that? You know, it's quite understandable how Finland and Taiwan and Denmark and New Zealand have controlled the virus, but how Bangladesh has done is totally baffles me. Bangladeshis are like us, non-law abiding, scorn for authority. They're as dishonest as many of us are, and yet they managed to control that. So I don't know whether it is their charismatic leader whom they are following, and they've been able to do that, or how this has happened. My observation here comes from the title of the book. We know that the virus, there are many reasons for the virus. It could be a combination of our letting our guard down. It could be this phenomena of the Shahi Snans, and it could be the political rallies, or whatever it may be, or a combination of all these things that the virus seems to be getting out of control. But my observation relates to the title of the book, where it talks about a billion fireflies. If I've understood correctly, what probably Mr. Maira is suggesting is that a billion people together have to fight this war. Everybody has to put in his or her best to fight this hydra-headed enemy, which is today sort of confounding us. Now that is fine. Each one of us needs to put in our best effort to do that. But don't we need a coordinated effort for all this billion people working in different ways? Don't we need a charismatic leader who right now, I'm sorry to say, but we don't seem to have one addressing the nation to coordinate the efforts? Otherwise, this billion people might go in billion different ways and create more chaos.
Thank you so much, Krishan. I think you hit the nail on the head. First, you asked about Bangladesh. Exactly. Counterfactuals, as a scientist, if you study them, you know, how come they're getting the same result when I think that they cannot? As you said, you believe that they are just like us, and you think, therefore, they act just like us. Bangladesh has, for the last 20, 30 years, built up for the world and taught the world that empowering women on the ground is the way to improve the livelihoods in their communities, the health of people in their communities, and so on. So the women's empowerment movement on the ground is a big Bangladeshi contribution to the world. We had a Nobel laureate also who got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. But the bigger organization than the Grameen is BARC, B-A-R-C, BARC, the NGO, the development organization. The work it's been doing for many, many years. People don't celebrate it because it doesn't sound as big as Oxfam or Save the Children. We keep looking for the big things as the examples to follow, Bill Gates and so on. The people who actually produce the results, we don't notice them. They don't make a big show. So as people have been pointing out, I have learned that myself. Please look at how Bangladesh has been for some years getting up and catching up with India and now overtaken India. It is this method. It's a bottom-up method. And I mentioned women. And you know, I mentioned Bangladesh does happen to have a woman president, but so does Taiwan, New Zealand, Denmark, and Finland. I mean, Vietnam doesn't. So women, there's something about women and their way to nurture coordination in a family. How does a woman coordinate things in the family? Not like the father who says, I told you to do this, now thou shalt do that, or else. So we have in management a need to coordinate. That's how you get results on scale. But there are two approaches to coordination. One is top down, by giving people detailed instructions, and if they don't follow, punishing them. And the other, in your business, as you know, is laterally. People, by just connecting information with each other, they coordinate with each other. So the lateral method of cooperating with others laterally can enable great coordination. And so coming back to Vietnam, as we learned with HelpAge International, what the older people needed was, their instinct, as all of us have, is to take care of others around ourselves and be cared for by them. But we don't know the management method of coordinating laterally. We are taught the thing about you must elect a chief, and then the chief will tell you what to do. And therein we have destroyed the ability of a community to cooperate. And we've introduced, as we said, the top-down method and power and politics into the system there. So these methods of lateral cooperation to create systems, thinking-based solutions which are formed by communities and cooperatively implemented by community is the toolkit, I've got that in the book, which you say you haven't read yet, and I do hope you will. And in there, I've explained also something that actually Rekha reminded me that I've worked with her 25 years, because the first time I was with CII and Rekha was when I was still a consultant from the States. And I was invited here by some Indian leaders, Tarun Das of CII, Montek, who was then in the Planning Commission as a member, and a few others who said, you know, why can't we get our act right? We got such smart people in the country, better economists than others, better technologists than others, better doctors than others, and yet we don't. So we looked at the model of change and the model of leadership. And we came out by looking around that there are 4 theories of leadership. One of them was the one in which we say experts at the top, they will find the solutions. But experts at the top don't cooperate with each other. The person who's telling us the medical solution doesn't understand what the economic requirements are. The economist doesn't listen to them. So we get these, the picture drawn there was of a scenario of buffaloes wallowing in a pond, all big guys with big expertise, not cooperating with each other, not understanding each other. And the poor people of the country are waiting, ये बड़े-बड़े planning commission वगैरह से हमारा कुछ फायदा नहीं हो रहा है. अभी भी यही बात हो रही है. The second model, again, a top-down model is, well, they leave it to the wealthy people. If they make more money, they will somehow, their ideas and the wealth will trickle down. So that was the model, which is the capitalist model. Leave it to them and get the governments out of the way. Let's leave it to the private sector to take care of it. And they have done very good things. So in this model, the picture was of peacocks strutting while little birds are scrambling. The little birds want the grain, which the open market, the opportunities provides them. It provides them. But the peacocks are bigger, so they first gather the grain. And until they feel fully fed, they're not going to give space to the little birds. So this process of cumulative causation, that those who have can get even more, is what is operating when you open things up unregulated. Okay, this again is a top-down method of change. Let the big get bigger and they'll somehow bless everybody below, top-down. The third one is a model of change with the danda, that give people the power. They can declare an emergency and control, and they will coordinate and sort things out. Again, top-down. But we know what happens with that model, that there are little people scrambling, and they get hurt by the bigger people who are also scrambling around them and have more power to get what they need. So all these 3 top-down models don't build the goodness for the people who have the least. When the people themselves at the bottom start to build it up, and I was giving you examples that I've noticed in the last few years, and especially during the pandemic of bottom-up change. We had found in India then, I'm talking of the year 2000, that there were so many examples within our own country of people in their communities, women in their communities, young NGOs, small NGOs in their communities, getting the community to cooperate together and with very limited resources, managing water better in Rajasthan, managing poultry businesses better in rural areas of Jharkhand. This model of fireflies arising and communities working together is the model. India was and is and can be, and Gandhiji was the biggest proponent, and he didn't get as a theory. He had observed how things work. So I say yes, it works, and this is what is required in the pandemic and has worked in the pandemic also, as I mentioned, in those places where community-based action has been the theory of use in Vietnam, in Denmark and Finland, of course, the more socialist, like we call them, it's communities.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I see that Mr. Keval Noria is also here. Sir, would you want to ask something? You'll have to unmute yourself if you do.
Arun, thank you very much for your very nice talk. You see, some people say that the way we measure the performance of the capitalist system, that's the problem. You have to define different parameters to measure the capitalist system, but nobody has defined their parameters clearly. Unless you define the parameters, how the success of the capitalist system will be measured, capitalist system will continue to behave the way they are behaving.
Absolutely right, G. I'm so honored to be talking with you. You have been, since I came back to India at that time, I'm talking about a real a philosopher guide for me. Yes, there are 2 levels. One is about the economy, the measurement of the health of an economy. In the capitalist or the GDP model of the economists, it's all a money measure. And you can measure, therefore, the quality of only those things which you can convert into money. And so when you talk about people's compassion, people's feelings of trust, you can't convert these into a money measure, therefore it can't be counted. It can't be put into the mathematical model of the economist. So we've got to get away from a single point measure, that is the GDP, and start to include the assessment and the judgment about other things. We may not measure them as precisely, but that doesn't mean we don't include them in our observation of what is going on. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry, this is my wife's phone was on the room. She left it by mistake. No, so the measurement, we need new scorecards for nations, and the studies being done by the people like the economists and the foundations in Germany particularly, about why some countries are managing the social side as well as the environmental side and the economic growth better than others. And the countries of Northern Europe are clearly those. One second. Why don't you take it away? Are those countries. How did they come to an agreement in society about what we should measure about the health of our economy? It was conversations between people, conversations between policymakers and people to say, please guys, don't keep telling us how the GDP is doing. You may say the GDP is doing, but look at the life around me. I want you to be knowing what the life around me is, at least have these on your scorecards. So as policymakers listening to the people, what matters, and including those metrics in the scorecard of the nation. Similarly, corporations must have a broader scorecard and not just on the profit. I was so happy to read today in the papers that SEBI has said that the first 1,000 companies in India will be required to report their performance on an all-around balanced scorecard. And that balanced scorecard has been developed by people in India voluntarily. Our business associations were participants in it, NGOs were participants in it, and the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and I was there, were participants in it. We voluntarily say, we business people, that we should be measured by this. But that's the time when they did it. Some people said, yes, sir, बहुत complicated hai. Just ask the business to give 2% of their profit into CSR and life would be all right. So that's when we had that seminar and said, no, let's get back to real business responsibility. We must have, as you said, broader scorecards, and businesses must report to stakeholders against those scorecards, be willing to take feedback and say, you're not doing very well, just like they do with their shareholders on their financial scorecards.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Arunji. We are almost coming to the end of it, and there are some other senior people I have here. I see Mr. Atmaram Saraogi and people like Kiran Karnik, etc. here. But with their permission, can I ask a question on behalf of so many of the younger people here? And I see, and I'm clubbing it together and a theme, because there are questions around the education sector and questions around younger managers who have been pursuing their studies in this kind of scenario. What does their future look like? Jobs are difficult, issues are difficult right now. What guidance would you give them and our education system to incorporate many of the changes that you have sort of talked about today in governance and thinking, in organizing ourselves better?
Yeah, thank you.
It's a lot, but
that is the key question. And my previous book, which you mentioned about transforming systems, why the world needs a new ethical toolkit. That new ethical toolkit was a toolkit that I've described for people, young managers getting into business school. What should business schools teach? And that's described in that book. And let me say this. We are talking about the VUCA world, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. This is the world for business people themselves. And we know that businesses were already being transformed before the pandemic, and they're going to be more rapidly changed and transformed after this. So business people can't predict what sort of people they need, what skills they need, they can't. So here, when we are being asked to design the country, to design a skill improvement system, we will go and ask auto companies, that we were asking them, how many different sorts of people do you need? That's what we asked them 7-8 years ago. Then the auto companies discovered that, my goodness, they're getting electrical cars, all projections are wrong. Meanwhile, we had set up long pipelines of, in class 11 and 12 also, they should be fiddling around with an internal combustion engine to start getting the basics and then going into vocational training after that. That method of learning that preparing yourself for something at the end of 10, 12 years, which you'll be able to do very precisely, is the wrong method. You have to learn, because you're going to have to learn new things. What to learn also, no one can tell you. So you got to be listening to the world and saying, what's happening? What's happening? Let me make some sense for myself and say, if I try to do those things and learn how to do them better, maybe I will succeed. This is entrepreneurship. But it comes to the essence of learning to learn. To learn, you must look at systems around you and understand the forces shaping the system. This must be taught in business schools. Systems thinking based scenarios, not mathematical prediction based scenarios. Okay. Second is listening. Because unless you listen to diverse people, you can't even understand the forces that are shaping the system. And unless people challenge you by having different thinking, you can't understand the limitations of your own thinking. So deep listening is a quality that young people must learn. We have learned it as children, but in schools we are taught how to speak better, win debates, which is not about listening, is the opposite. And we have leaders also who can give us big bhashans, but are they listening? We must learn to listen. It's very simple. Just, especially when someone challenges you, just stop and ask, why does this person believe this? Look out for people who you think will be different and are wrong. That's why I talk about the social media. Get outside your bubble. In fact, close down that phone. Just look for people who say, I normally wouldn't talk to this person, then just start the conversation about who's this person? What does the person think? What's this person's solution? Learning to learn.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful message at the end of this very, very interesting session, which has been both intellectually stimulating and, if I may say, practical, both. And that itself is very interesting for people to hear and understand this. You know, it's interesting because it's a matter of coincidence perhaps, but just yesterday, and actually today as well, but yesterday I was speaking at our own groups. Again, I hate to use the words CSR convention across all our companies, and which was running yesterday and today, but I was speaking yesterday. The interesting thing is that this time we were focusing on other sustainable issues that you talked about, the circular economy, for example. Issues around, and which by the way, I'll share with you separately, we're doing work around women empowerment through self-help groups and a whole lot of things. And we are finding that those are really opening up avenues of entrepreneurship and also, getting what we want in terms of livelihoods, responsibility, teamwork, things that you talked about today, the whole systems way of working, problem solving is all about, around this. And it's very interesting when we think of it in a management concept, and here on the ground with illiterate people, you're actually achieving the same thing. So it's very interesting, and thank you for igniting, if I may say, some of these kinds of thoughts and the bottom-up approach. This whole issue that you brought about of Gandhiji, and we often forget in this country, that Gandhiji was talking about the wealth creators being trustees of the people. And actually, if you look back, if I may say, these expressions, CSR or corporate philanthropy, have become measures and buzzwords today. But if I look back at our own Indian heritage and ethos, for centuries, frankly, it was the people who made money who gave. The only difference between the Western and the Eastern, or the Indian at least, ethos was when you gave, you did not speak about it. It did not make the headlines of the Economic Times to say you have given so many crores, many millions or billions of dollars. And actually, even in this COVID crisis, believe you me, there are so many people, from ordinary citizens to people of modest means to people of bigger means, who are making such contributions which you and I are not even aware of. So thank you very much. And if I may say, those are a part of your billion fireflies. So thank you very much for being with us. I know, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time, but thank you for your participation and being here today. I hope you will pick up Dr. Maira's book and get some interesting insights and thoughts. And of course, now that Rekha has said that we're not letting you go away, we can carry on this debate. Rekha, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Singhania, and thank you, Mr. Maira. It was wonderful as usual. You took me back, I think, 20, 25 years when you talked about the buffaloes and the peacock and the fireflies, because I still recall your wonderful drawings that you showed us when we were in CII. And I think today's session has been outstanding. We had more than 850 people who were watching us today, and a lot of questions. And I'd like to apologize to all our members whose questions we could not take. But thanks for joining us, Mr. Maira, and hopefully have you back with us on the AIMA platform very soon. And a big thank you to all our members who are here with us today.
Thank you indeed.
Thank you very much.
Good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Everybody
Good night.
remains healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.